Imagine a struggling young artist in Vienna living in a flophouse, painting postcards for tourists, and nursing a massive chip on his shoulder. That was Adolf Hitler in his early 20s, a man who would go on to become the most destructive force of the 20th century. His life is the ultimate cautionary tale of how a cocktail of resentment, charismatic manipulation, and a complete lack of human empathy can bring the world to the brink of annihilation. To understand his logic, you have to realize that Hitler viewed history not as a series of events, but as a brutal, biological struggle for survival between races. He wasn't just a politician, he was a man obsessed with a twisted fantasy of racial purity and a greater Germanic Reich where the Aryan race would rule supreme. His rise to power was almost like a dark, magic trick. Germany was reeling from the humiliation of World War I and the crushing economic despair of the Great Depression. Hitler stepped into that void with an oratorical skill that was frankly terrifying. He knew exactly what the people wanted to hear. He blamed the Jews, the communists, and the weak democratic politicians for everything that had gone wrong. He offered them a scapegoat, a dream of national rebirth, and the promise of Lebensraum, or living space, in the East. It was a message of toxic nationalism, and it worked. By 1933, the man who couldn't get into art school was the Chancellor of Germany, and before long, he dismantled democracy to become the absolute Führer. Physically, he was a walking contradiction to his own ideology. While he preached the perfect Aryan physique, he was a high-strung, anxious individual with a host of health problems. By the 1940s, he was physically deteriorating, suffering from tremors, likely Parkinson's, and was constantly pumped full of various medications by his personal doctor. He had severe digestive issues and was a nervous, volatile man who could snap from a calm conversation into a screaming tantrum in seconds. His personality was a mix of intense, almost pathological focus and a complete inability to listen to anyone who didn't confirm his own biases. His brilliant strategy for success was, ironically, betting on the world's desire for peace. In the late 1930s, he broke treaty after treaty, annexing Austria and Czechoslovakia, while the other world powers stood by, hoping he would just be satisfied. He utilized blitzkrieg, a lightning war strategy using fast, coordinated movements of tanks and aircraft to steamroll through Europe. It felt unstoppable for a while. He wasn't just planning for a country, he was planning for an empire that would span across Russia and deep into Europe, systematically eradicating anyone he deemed inferior. But the cracks in the armor started to show because of his own fatal flaws, ego and delusion. His biggest weakness was his inability to know when to stop. He treated military campaigns like he was playing a board game, often ignoring the advice of his seasoned generals to follow his own intuition. When he invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, he opened a massive second front that Germany simply didn't have the resources to maintain. It was a colossal miscalculation, a gamble that turned his 1,000-year empire into a death trap for millions, including his own soldiers. The end was as pathetic as his beginning was chaotic. As the walls closed in and the Allied forces marched toward Berlin, the man who thought he would rule the world spent his final days in an underground bunker, increasingly detached from reality and heavily medicated. When he finally committed suicide in 1945, he left behind a Germany in absolute total ruin and a world horrified by the discovery of the Holocaust, a systematic genocide that remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. He failed at everything he claimed to stand for. He didn't save Germany. He destroyed it. He didn't create a master race. He left behind a legacy of absolute shame. Ultimately, he was a cautionary monument to the danger of unchecked hatred, a man who thought he was a god, but left the stage as nothing more than a villain who proved exactly what happens when humanity loses its moral compass.